Welcome to Glass Half Full with Leslie Krongold. She shares her stories, experiences, and knowledge of living and coping with a chronic health condition. Learn about tools and resources and hear inspirational interviews that help you to live a life filled with quality and dignity. With 2 decades of support group leadership, Leslie's ready to help you make lemonade out of life's lemons. Are you ready?
Hello and welcome to the podcast. This month, October, is National Disability Awareness Month. Some of us are aware of disabilities throughout the entire year, but this month, we're very aware. In last year's podcast episode acknowledging this month of awareness, I referred to disability as the D word. It's one of those button-pushing terms, and today's episode explores the issue of identifying as disabled. Whether you have a physical, emotional, cognitive, or mental disability, or perhaps you are completely able-bodied, able-minded, just wait. At some point in your future, you will be disabled. Boo! It's almost Halloween. Did I scare you? Sorry about that. But seriously, we age. Our vision and hearing deteriorate. People get hips, knees, rotator cuffs replaced. There's an incredible amount of memory loss, even without dementia. We all have different abilities. Many of our abilities change as we age. Some of us are born with less ability in certain areas. It's just how life is. So many of my episodes, podcast episodes, originate somewhere in my past support group work. Years ago, Penny, a woman who came to the support group I facilitated, introduced me to Superfest, which is an annual film festival in Berkeley, California, with films by, about, and for people with disabilities. Penny had the special honor of screening all film entries and would share a few of the previous films from the previous year with the support group. It was a lot of fun. It was very nice of her. And that was many years ago. I had attended the Superfest before, but kind of was off my radar in the last few years. But earlier this year, I bumped into Penny, and she told me the festival had moved to San Francisco State University and was co-sponsored by the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability and the Lighthouse for the Blind. And that's how I met my guest for today's episode. Catherine Kudlick is a professor of history at San Francisco State University, and she's the director of the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability. Can you tell me about your career path? Because as I understand, you studied French history and you taught that, and now you teach disability history, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me a little about that.
Okay, so let's see. I'll go way back. I was born blind with no vision, and when I was about 9 months old, my parents took a picture with a flash camera, and I responded to it, and that led to a whole series of operations and discoveries. And so over the course of my entire life, I've had eye surgeries like all the time, and they restored. They got some of my sight, and it's still, compared to most people, one doctor put it this way, he said it's pretty darn crappy. But it's still, it's usable, and I use it a lot. And I kind of got the bee in my bonnet. I loved history. I loved thinking about Europe and France in particular. And so I ended up going to graduate school, it's a little bit masochistic for somebody that didn't have any kind of assistive technology at the time. And, but I didn't know it. I didn't know I didn't know that stuff existed. 2, I didn't know I needed it. I I just kind of just soldiered on and struggled and worked really hard. But I loved the material so much that I just kept pushing, And so I was plugging along in my merry way. And when I went to my first job that was a visiting professor, people started to confront me about what I could and couldn't see. And I was more honest about it too. And it led to some backlash, some discrimination where I wasn't considered for a permanent position. And so I kind of had to really confront disability in an open way for the first time in my life. It's nothing like a little discriminatory moment to wake you up and say, "Oh, wow, I've been sort of wronged here. What do I do about that?" You can either kind of put your head in the sand and pretend they're right, or whatever. But I kind of did what a scholar typically does, and you embrace what's you, and you try to study it in some other way. So I didn't go to the point initially of wanting to study myself necessarily, but I was really interested in French history of medicine, bodies, women, gender, all that stuff. And I was always quite interested in that notion of the body and how people think about it. So after this discrimination happened, I began to wonder, well, maybe there's a way that disability can be studied too. And this was in the early 1990s, before, just in the moment when disability studies was starting to crystallize as a discipline. And it was very, very kind of small and not necessarily, nobody really knew about it. And I just kind of thought, I've got a new scholarly topic, but I didn't think I'd have a new field. And gradually, you put the word out and you start talking about it to people and you hear about things and you hear about conferences. I went to the conference for Society of Disability Studies, and I was like, oh my goodness, what is this? There's all these people here, and they've got disabilities, and they scare me to death, and I'm really excited, and I'm like, wow, there's ideas and there's people, and it's not just, I don't have to just pretend my body's like a carrot and that's not really a body. I can say, wow, my body has an essence, and I can think, and I can write about the past and people like me in the past and all of that. So it was kind of a natural evolution. In some ways, I had already picked to study bodies. My first book was on cholera epidemics. That was my PhD research. And then gradually after that, I started to move over more and more into disability studies and disability history, which kind of was an outgrowth in the United States of disability studies. So I kind of inched over there, and before I knew it, I was just excited and meeting people and engaging and engaged in ways I'd never had been before. And it was a full engagement. It wasn't just my mind. It was my mind and my body and my heart and all the things that matter for being a human.
So the term nystagmus, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, nystagmus.
Nystagmus. Can you define that, or because it's
a medical condition, and basically there's two times in your life that you get it. Like any disability, you get it like it's congenital, so you grow up with it, and that's the case in mine because it's basically what it is the eye is either moving or vibrating constantly. It's just kind of jiggling, so it has trouble focusing on what's out there. It doesn't quite know what to make of the material and all that. And it's a pretty common condition for people that have the same kind of cataracts that I had when I was younger. That's what made me blind in the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have the techniques for removing them soon enough. And so my eyes developed with this kind of jumpiness. And it's just something I've lived with my whole life. And sometimes I get these moments of just amazing clarity where it's just sharp, and they're really not very long. They're just like seconds. But I'm aware of it, and it's just kind of fascinating. And, I asked my doctors many years ago, is there anything we could do to, like, any drug? And he said, you'd be so drugged up, you wouldn't even know what you were looking at, but you'd see clearly. So, whatever. The other time that people get nystagmus is they get it later in life. And I did some research on it a few years ago and realized that people that get it later in life, it's a nightmare because their body never adjusted to it. So as far as they're concerned, it's just, movement all the time. And their body doesn't know even, mine doesn't know what to do with it, but it's always had it. But this is like new movement that when they're not used to having it. So I think it's a really tough adjustment. Well, and a lot of people don't adjust. I mean, I think people, either shut down or, whatever. I mean, I'm sure that probably if billions of people were listening to your podcast, there will be somebody that called up and said, well, I got nystagmus later in life and I did great, but I don't know, just from what I've read and what I know in my limited field. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical expert by any stretch. And I'm not up with the latest, but that's roughly what it is.
Okay. Yeah. No, I had never heard of it. And, I mean, it's interesting when you learn about other people's conditions. Prior to being part of a neuromuscular disease community, I think if I ever saw someone in a wheelchair, and this is, when I was in my 20s, I would have assumed they cannot walk.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, I realize that many people use wheelchairs out of safety, and perhaps in their home they can walk a little with assistance. And I even use a wheelchair in difficult situations like an airport. So, if I met you and you had a cane and dark glasses, I would just assume, well, you're blind.
Lights out,
you
nobody
can't
home.
see, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I confront that all the time. Yeah. And then if I pull out like a Kindle or something like that, it's like, it's like, that's the thing. I mean, disability is all or nothing for people. And I think the one gift that our generation is probably transmitting a lot is the fact that, there's a lot of ways to be disabled, and there's a lot of ways to be able-bodied too. So it's there's a kind of a spectrum really. And again, it's context dependent too. Like you said, if you're in your house, you don't need stuff. There you are in your house. Or when I'm sitting, I know the environment here at San Francisco State really well now, so I don't need my cane in the daytime. I totally need it at night. I totally need it at the airport. I totally need it when there's a crowd around me and I'm like, what is this? But other times I don't. So am I faking it and cheating? No, it's just I'm using something when I need it. And, that's part of the adjustment that we need to kind of convey to society, the new views of disability, that it's a kind of continuum and it's contingent on context and, But in my case, there were always people that were way more blind than me or way more physically disabled than me. And I just thought, who am I to say that I'm disabled if there's these people out there that are so much more disabled than me? And it took a long time to accept that, guess what? Yeah, sure, I'm going to be way more disabled than some people and not just disabled as others. And in some situations, I'm more disabled and some I'm less, and same with them. And so you're in this kind of mishmash of different people with different identities that are all on different parts of their journey. And you're just kind of brushing up against them and having conversations and questioning yourself and wondering are they the real thing? What's the real disabled? What's the authentic disabled person? And for me, I could never figure that out. And I'm sure people spend tons of hours wondering if I am or not. It's just an interesting, not to think that people spend all these hours thinking about me, but it's kind of a generic me in the.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the term disability denial. So tell me what how you would define that. Give me an example.
I think it's basically saying I'll do fine despite my disability. I can do this. You don't have to ask me. You don't have to provide me any accommodations. You don't have to do this. I can do it just like you. I'm just as strong as you are. And, hell be damned, whatever that expression is, I'm gonna get there and I won't need any help and I'm gonna be very proud of it. And if somebody says, "Oh, can I help you?" I would say, "Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine." Even if it takes me 20 more hours to do something, or, I'm in emotional anguish over doing it, the fact that I can show them that I am okay, and okay is a relative definition, as we all know. If I can tell somebody that I'm okay, then we don't have to worry. Somebody wants to help me do something, let them help me. That's going to give me, I could either spend the time like trying to struggle through and make a good impression, or I could use that time to, as Paul Longmore used to say, I could use that time to read a book, or I could use that time to write an article, or I could use that time to create a piece of art, or, whatever you get to do that's creative, rather than putting on this performance for non-disabled people to make yourself feel okay. So, there's plenty of forms of help that happens in society that's not stigmatized. The thing I always tell my students, okay, here, I have a job description for you. Here's, in this job, this person takes notes, they go shopping, they drive you around, they, help you get it set up in your house. They, do all these things. They kind of, go online for you, all that. And so in the context of all this, my students would say, "Oh yeah, this is a helper for somebody with a disability." And I said, "No, it's an executive assistant for a CEO of a top company." And, why is that kind of help not stigmatized? These people, why don't they have to go out and prove that they can do something themselves? Why is that,
Yeah, so that's a great teaching tool. Now I want to ask you about your discovery about pirates.
Yes. So I guess one of the questions I kind of like to ask people to think with, and it's a problematic question, but it's still interesting, I ask them if they've ever thought of a pirate as a disability action figure. And you can really hear people sort of engage with that and say, "Whoa, never thought of that." Now, the pirate is a complex figure. There's lots of stereotyping and, gender splaining and race splaining that goes with it. And there's all sorts of, it's a tricky figure. It's not a perfect airtight thing. Nonetheless, it does allow people to think about disability differently. And I love a moment like that to get people just to click on it and say, "Whoa, that's something new." And, and to get them to meditate on why it is that that's such a shocking revelation for them. And where does that come from? Does it come from, I never thought pirates were helpless? Does it ever come from, I never thought people with disabilities are strong? So it's an interesting thing if you think about the peg leg and the eye patch and the hooked arm, all that stuff. Those are disabilities. And not to mention a whole probably list of invisible disabilities that go with being a pirate and becoming a pirate or whatever. So, just to get people to really think about what they take for granted in the images that we kind of trot out every day. That's one of the reasons that I use that pirate imagery.
Life on the open seas.
Let's talk about Superfest now, the International Disability Film Festival, which happens annually at the end of October or beginning of November. It's been a few years since I attended the festival, so I asked how the festival has changed. So as I remember, there were films by people with disabilities about people with disabilities. Is that still the case?
Mostly. I would say that in most cases that's true. There's an occasional exception. Like a couple years ago, we had a film called The Vampire of Transylvania or something, and it was a cool collaboration between a sound person who was blind and a deaf person who was a musician, and they and a filmmaker, and they made this film together. And so that just it had nothing to do with disability at all, but because of the nature of the collaboration of the filmmakers, decided to keep it. And it was a cartoon. It was animated. It was actually really a great opportunity. So, obviously we want to foreground disability in whatever way possible, but sometimes it's so great to just show the creativity and ingenuity and the kind of partnerships that form when you bring disability into any kind of filmmaking.
So do you all distribute films? How can someone, outside of the Bay Area see some of these films?
So we have something called the Superfest Showcase, and we're working that up right now to sort of create little packages of films that people might want to see based on themes or, kind of maybe common disability or location or something. And so, we work with a group that wants to bring this to them. It's anything from schools to people doing sexuality programs to lawyers or whatever. I mean, we would kind of work with them to curate the set of films that we've shown. And then, over the years, not the new ones, of course, that we haven't shown yet, but that we know are coming, but the older ones. And then we work up this thing called it's a Superfest Showcase that allows them to kind of think about how they would bring that to them, based on their own interests and what's important to their group.
And let's say someone listens to this podcast and they have made a film or they're enticed and want to, make a film. Are there guidelines for future?
Yes, there are. Yeah, if you go to the website, which is superfestfilm.com, the judging tends to open in February, March. There are submissions come in starting in February and March. And then, through the spring, we're frantically judging, and, for first we have a group of San Francisco State students that we work with. We kind of educate them about disability. It's really a great kind of opportunity for them. We take students with disabilities only and, or who identify as having disabilities. And we kind of train them to think about, what makes a good film, what makes a good portrayal of disability. And we try to take it beyond the, disability 101 that are the kind of, vaguely feel good, oh, isn't that nice for those disabled people, which are, for all intents and purposes, they're positive portrayals of disability. But what we want to do is get films that are taking that to the next level, getting people to think about disability in new ways that they might not have thought about it. So in relationship to something like sexuality or relationship to race or any kind of new discoveries that come about not through, say, inspiration, but say ingenuity and creativity and fun and play and, enjoyment. So it's not just looking and saying, oh, I feel so good for those people and isn't this nice, but to really, kind of ask people to really engage with disabilities in ways that they might not get to in other venues or other circumstances.
So I want to ask you just a couple more questions about Superfest. So the judging committee or screening committee, is there like a working definition of disability? And has that changed over, I guess, the 5 years that you've been involved?
The definition of disability, as you know, is so fluid and it's always kind of evolving, and some new idea or new group or new perspective will come in and people will say, oh, wow, yeah, that is disability too. So, we have the sort of mainstream disabilities like your sensory disabilities, blind, deaf people, but we also have, cognitive disabilities. We have psychiatric disabilities. We have emotional, other kinds of emotional stuff. So it's very broad, and we get our students and judges in general to really think about, disability in a broad sense, because I think it's not just the physical condition, it's a set of attitudes too that are, kind of embedded in how people think about difference and how people try to change, the standard narrative around disability. So that could be kind of a disability perspective, I guess, if you want to call it that. And I think we're trying to showcase that as well. The one thing I do want to point out that is different that we do from the previous Superfest, the one that and It's partly because of being partners with the Lighthouse, but partly because of our philosophy. We embed audio description in all of our films. So you don't go off to the corner if you're a blind person and sit and have your private little headphones on. We broadcast the audio description for everybody, so that we're trying to come up with a way to maybe allow people to opt out of audio description, because obviously some people find that really, really distracting and problematic. So, we want to understand that too. But in general, I think it's a new way to experience film going for lots of people, and they start noticing things in films that they might not have seen before. Audio description itself is a really evolving genre that's very subjective and kind of interesting. So we want to get people to think about, why do you choose to describe something in a picture or a movie or whatever, that, and why don't you describe others? So it leads to some really interesting conversations. And we realize, obviously, in addition to captioning and sign language interpreting, the audio description plays a part in how people experience film. And, it's a work in progress. We sometimes have conflict. We sometimes, between what's going on with the audio description and what's going on, what people expect of a film and all of that. It's a very interesting and different film-going experience.
Do you ever have sighted people respond that, wow, I didn't even notice that?
Well, exactly. Yeah. In fact, one of the best moment of it is we were showing one film, and the director saw it afterwards with the audio description, and he had worked on it and gotten it embedded in his film. And he basically said, something, I don't really want to show my film another way ever again. I really want audio description to be part of it. And I think what it does is it makes you more conscious of choices that people make when they're looking at stuff or deciding stuff. So it's just a really interesting way to experience things. It's not perfect. It's not, and not every other multiplex is going to rush out and want to do this. But, that's what's cool about what we are. We're sort of this different, small, grassroots, grounded in the community group, partnership that's just trying to push the boundaries for everybody to think differently about cinema and movies and all that.
Yo ho ho!
If you live near the San Francisco Bay Area, please check the website for the list of international films playing in Berkeley and San Francisco on November 4th and 5th. If you're interested in screening Superfest films in your community, get in touch with the Longmore Institute at San Francisco State University.
Thank you for listening to Glass Half Full. Leslie invites you to leave a rating and review on iTunes. This helps spread the word to others dealing with chronic health issues. For show notes, updates, and more, visit the website glasshalffull.online. Glasshalffull.online.